what our experience actually is. Because many times the story about what's happening will come so quickly and get so entangled with our experience that we hardly even know what's happening. So here's the story I usually tell about that. I was teaching with Joseph Goldstein somewhere, and Joseph and I were sitting in the kitchen having a cup of tea, and someone came in to the kitchen in some distress, and he said to Joseph, I just had this really terrible experience. So Joseph said, well, what happened? And he said, I felt all this tension in my jaw, and I realized what an incredibly uptight person I am and how I always have been and I always will be. And Joseph said, you mean you felt a lot of tension in your jaw? And he said, yes, and I've never been able to get close to people, it's never going to change. And Joseph said, you mean you felt a lot of tension in your jaw? And it's really interesting for me watching them go back and forth and back and forth. No matter what elaborate story this man came up with, Joseph would just say, you mean you felt a lot of tension in your jaw? And then finally Joseph said to him, why are you adding a miserable self-image to a painful experience? It's like painful enough to feel the tension in your jaw, but you've now added, and I'm going to be alone for the rest of my life, right? Which is just a story that he was telling himself. So it's like pain plus, right? And we really don't need the plus. So that's really where mindfulness practices go. You know, to see the difference between our direct experience and the story, to have enough space from the story to check out for ourselves what is actually our experience like. So there's a whole other category of meditation practices that aren't designed so much to have us just see what our experience is, but I call them the stretch. You know, it's actually consciously and intentionally shifting the way we're paying attention to see what our experience then is. So a common example of that would be something like a gratitude reflection. You know, and many researchers, many psychotherapists would say that one of the most healing things that any of us could do is keep a kind of gratitude journal. Like every night, write down 3 things that we're grateful for. I'm laughing because somebody just said they had a practice of finding 1 thing a month, and I thought, 1 thing a month? That's like a little harsh, you know? Like, I think, you know, if you count, it doesn't have to be grandiose or, you know, like if you count breathing, and breathing is 1, then you got one right away, you know? But in talking about a gratitude practice, I also always say, because it's true, this did not come naturally to me. It didn't come automatically to me. By virtue of my personal conditioning, my family's conditioning, my cultural conditioning, I'm so much more likely to come to the end of the day and see what I can complain about. You know, I didn't show up the way I hoped to, or someone disappointed me, or it's always an airline, there's always a phone service, you know. And that's true. So for me, at that moment, to remember what I have to be grateful for is a stretch. But it doesn't mean it's phony or forced or coerced, or it's like, I'm going to make an experiment. It's not moving from a true place to a false place. It's moving to another true place that usually doesn't get much airtime, because I'm very fixated on what's wrong, like many of us. So loving kindness works that way. We experiment with how we pay attention. Loving kindness for ourselves would be a foundational example. Many of us might have the habit at the end of the day of evaluating ourselves, almost like, how did I do today? And for many of us, we will fixate on what went wrong, what we didn't do perfectly, you know, what we could have done better. And it's a little bit of a stretch to say, anything else happened today? Like any good within me? You know, through wishing ourselves well. Or we're, in loving kindness, we're consciously shifting how we pay attention, so that maybe we pay attention more fully to the people we usually look right through, you know, that we dismiss or we disdain, just through indifference, let alone through bias or whatever. But, you know, the people we see who play some role in our lives, we've just objectified so much, or creatures, other forms of life, they are like the other, just through our indifference. And so The experiment is what happens when I look at them instead of through them. You know, so we're always modulating how we're paying attention in loving kindness practice.
Now, don't take this the wrong way, but I do find it refreshing that even Sharon Salzberg has suffered